We're back at it with decision makers, our frequent conversations with policymakers, prognosticators, and experts who offer us the latest insights and perspectives on a wide range of issues. This session, we're talking with Phyllis Dickerson. She is CEO of the African American Mayors Association, an organization representing Black mayors throughout the United States. Thank you, Phyllis. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Charles, for inviting me.
All right, excellent. First, I believe what, AfricanAmericanMayors.org, is that correct?
Yes, it's ourmayors.org.
OurMayors.org. I thank you for the correction. I appreciate that. So tell us about the organization. Obviously, people can go to OurMayors.org and find out more about it, who it represents, and what exactly does it do?
So we represent over 500 Black mayors around the U.S. We advocate for policy as it relates to anything from infrastructure, internet, healthcare, anything pertaining to our cities and our constituents. And three of the areas that we kind of cover is not just advocating for policy, but sharing of best practices and training and developing our mayors. Of course, many of you know that our mayors are getting younger and younger. A few years ago, we elected an 18-year-old mayor. He was the youngest mayor in the U.S., Mayor Jalen Smith. He kind of went viral. And so I remember just the first time I took Jalen to the White House and just to see it from his perspective.
Right.
Protesters walked by and he was like, "Miss Phyllis, what are they doing?" I said, "Protesting." And I realized for the first time he had seen protesters up close and personal.
Oh, wow.
Making each moment that teachable moment.
Okay, excellent. And you're telling us about like all the mayors that you're representing. Are you actively connecting all of those mayors, those 500 members? How do you facilitate engagement between them?
So we have our annual conference every year. This year, our conference will be April 16th through the 18th here in Washington, D.C. So we do definitely share the best practices and training, and we make sure we partner with our business council on most of those sessions that will happen there, whether it be on AI. Last year, we did a session on AI, and the room was packed because a lot of cities are just starting to talk about AI. And so, getting cities prepared, like what policies they need to be putting in place first, what type of financing that they need to have, and how do they leverage their dollars. And so we brought in the chief technology officer from New York, because the city of New York has been doing AI for 5 years and everybody else is just getting on the bandwagon, right? And so we bring in the experts to kind of share, they tell the good, the bad, and the ugly of how they got started. And mayors get to ask them questions and really share their best practices. We also do a podcast called Our Mayors Breaking It Down, where we talk to mayors. And again, that's another opportunity to share best practices. I remember interviewing Byron Brown after the shooting at the grocery store in Buffalo. And we start with, what were you doing that day? And so he talked about being in the park with his nieces and nephews and his wife, and the detail car pulls up and say, "Get in the car, we just had a mass shooting," and how he gets there and what happens, throughout the day that day.
Right.
Or Mayor Brandon Scott, when the Key Bridge collapsed, and he said, "I have my state of the city. I went out for a minute. We were all excited. I got home about midnight. My baby was still up. I put the baby to sleep. I took a shower, and I was in the bed 4 minutes, and the phone rang, and it was my police chief saying, 'You're not going to believe this, but the bridge is gone.'"
Oh,
And
wow.
so he jumps up, he puts on his hoodie, and he jumps, the detail comes back to pick him up, and he's like, "I'm in the car and I'm calling the governor. I'm calling the congressman. I'm calling U.S. senator. I'm waking everybody up because it's after midnight," right? And when he couldn't get in contact with people, he started calling people's chiefs of staff. And so everybody had to meet in a certain rendezvous spot so that they could see what the devastation is and what the response needed to be. So everybody needs to be on the same page. So for other mayors to hear that, then we hope and pray would never happen in their city. But if it does, then they know who to call on.
Right. I'm real curious, you mentioned AI is one issue. Obviously, you outlined some of those disasters like mass shootings, bridge or infrastructure collapses, disasters that happen that mayors have to face. What are those top issues that Black mayors right now are facing or are expected or are expecting to face right in 2025? I mean, it's the economy, workplace development, public safety, schools. I mean, there's also, intensifying climate change. disasters like what Mayor Karen Bass is dealing with out in Los Angeles right now. So, what are those top issues that they're thinking of right now, where they're expecting to face in 2025?
Well, Charles, you sound like an expert in local government because you just named half of the issues just right off the bat. We talked about climate change. Our policy pillars kind of fall in five areas normally, and then there are things that go underneath of them. And so, climate and environmental justice,
Mm,
revitalization of public safety, health, infrastructure, and it's always for us voting rights and civic engagement. But then also to side note, we have stuff like, that's just popped up. Immigration is now an issue for us, wealth creation. You talked about AI and technology is a big deal for us.
mm,
Last year we went to New York because he has the best of the best. Mayor Adams has been kind enough for many of our companies that roll out new public safety technology. They actually
mm,
test it a lot for us in New York. And so they send it back and they say, okay, it doesn't do this or it needs to do this. We have pressed, Axon is one of our business council members, and we press them to come out with a two-way body cam, right? So that if you're in a high-speed chase or anything like remotely like that, then the ranking officer can remote into your camera and say, stand down, like stop, right? Or if it's a mental health issue, a social worker can remote into your camera and the officer does not have to say a word because we don't have enough social workers. But if all they had to do was remote into your camera, then maybe we do have enough social workers, right? Then they're not spread. So then, because they may not be able to go to the site, they can be at the site virtually and they can talk to that mental health issue and diffuse the situation. So we talk to our business council members that help us leverage technology, how mayors leverage their dollars, and all of those things. So it is not easy, but it is definitely possible. Mayors always have done more with less. And so we just work to make it happen every day for our constituents. On the ground, I'm a former mayor's chief of staff. We always just talk about picking up trash, but it's a lot more that goes into the day in and day out.
mm. You know what? I'm also real curious about how Black mayors are how they're treating this caustic political environment that we find ourselves in, particularly from the 2024 elections and then heading into a new administration, that the expectation is that it will be, somewhat hostile to the collective interests of the Black community. And so how are Black mayors how are they expected to navigate all of that? This new environment, this new political public policy environment that we're going to find ourselves in this year.
So for a lot of our mayors, it's not new. We come to this question every 4 years. We have a lot of blue cities and red states, so we're used to doing this. We teach them how to play in the sandbox together. And one of the main ways is to find where you have commonality. So normally in infrastructure and public safety, that's usually the gravy spot where you can find commonality. We're not anti-gun, we're pro um, you know, gun safety people that are responsible gun owners. I tell everybody I own a gun and I grew up in the South. So in Arkansas, having a gun is like having a golf club in California. It's just what people do. They grow up, they hunt, it's a sport, right? And so a lot of people get their first gun in elementary in the South because their parents teach them how to hunt. And so we just want responsible gun owners. We also don't want um, ghost guns on the street because they're hard to track. I mean, we wouldn't allow somebody to manufacture cars without a VIN number, right? And so it's the same thing. If a company started manufacturing cars without a VIN number, they would shut them down immediately. And so those are the kind of conversations where we can find common ground and have everybody wants to live in a place that's safe for them to work and play and raise their family, right? And so when you get to that conversation and you find commonality, growing up in Little Rock, in the last three governors that when I was a mayor's chief of staff, I had Asa Hutchinson, first Asa Hutchinson, Mike Beebe, and I also had Mike Huckabee, right? And so I had two Republicans and one Democrat. I worked well with all three because I had to figure out where we had commonality and respect the position. When you never, if you, even if you don't respect the person, always respect the position. And I think people know when you do, because they had to ask favors for me and I had to ask favors for them. They're like, Phyllis, we really need you to change the mayor's schedule and get him to this meeting. Okay, we'll do a favor for you because next time I might need them to do a favor with me. So it's not going to be as hard as you think. We have this conversation every 4 years because somebody's going to be president and it may not be the person you personally voted for, but that's okay.
Hey, Phyllis, what's next for AAMA?
So our conference is coming up next, April
Right.
16th through 18th, as you know. But it's all the conversations. It's next month. We're in LA to talk about recovery. You know,
Okay.
you brought up climate change. So in California, it's the fires. In the South, you know, we're talking about tornadoes and flooding. But on the East Coast, we're talking about hurricanes. And so when we talk about recovery, you know, it needs to be a holistic approach where we have candid conversation about what does the new LA look like? You know, like reimagine your community because I've gone to devastated areas. Last year, Little Rock had their tornado, if everybody remembers. And I just remember going to the devastated area after the cleanup of the streets. And every landmark that you remember being there, the fire station, the church, the Shipley's Donuts, it was gone. So there were no markers, right? The things that are normally markers in your neighborhood. You know, when you tell people how to get to your house, you say, turn right at the Shipley's Donut, turn right at the church, or turn left at the fire station. None of those things are there. And so it doesn't even look like a neighborhood that you are able to see, and you can't even get your bearings. But what does that new LA look like? So in Little Rock, it looks like, you know, some people are rebuilding their houses. If they're not going to rebuild their house, do they want to sell the land for somebody else to do affordable housing in that neighborhood? On the small business side, what new small businesses were missing in the first place because it was an older neighborhood? So what do you want to see? And so we leverage our business council for the conversation. Like I just talked to Starbucks the other day. You know, a lot of their stores got burned. And so, you know, where's the new Starbucks and what does it look like? You know, is it something new and innovative for that particular neighborhood? And then the workforce development, what are those new jobs that we want the people in that neighborhood to have? And so, you know, LA is built around entertainment. So does housing need to figure out the same thing? And we partner with FEMA on the federal level to say, you know what, this application process is too convoluted. It takes too long. Do we need volunteers to help people out? Because we don't talk about people that can't read. I remember during COVID, there were people that couldn't read that needed to sign a consent form. What are you consenting to if you can't read?
Yeah.
You know, and so just being able to get people through the process. So whether it's a fire, it's a tornado, it's a flood, it's a hurricane, recovery is recovery. And so we're going to share those best practices and share that information with FEMA because, you know, the new people taking over, the new administration taking over, they may not have the expertise. And our mayors do this all the time. I know Van Johnson in Savannah, every time there is a storm coming and they think it's going to be flooding, the TV stations call and they're like, Phyllis, can we set up an interview with Mayor Johnson? Because he's always on that flood line. They don't know how much water he's going to get, but they know he's going to get some water.
You know, he's into some more. Right.
Mhm.
Well, thanks again, Phyllis. We really appreciate your time once again. That about wraps up this episode. I'm Charles Ellison, your executive producer and host. We've had Phyllis Dickerson, CEO of the African American Mayors Association. You can go to ourmayors.org for more information, to get more information on what we've been discussing for this session of Decision Makers. A warm round of gratitude to our partner at the Council of State Governments. More on them at csg.org. Thanks to senior producer Raven Robinson. Until then, find this episode and more while you're, of course, subscribing at thebnote.com. Take care and be safe.